Hi, I'm Andy, and welcome to a Watch Crave video. Today, we'll be having a look at another Seiko, the Sports GMT SSK003. I bought this watch during my trip to Japan last year. It's actually been on my wish list for a long time, but I couldn't find a good deal for it here in New Zealand. Luckily, the store in Japan had a good discount, so I picked it up along with the SPB143. These watches were first released in July 2022 and were the first to be powered by the Seiko 4R34 GMT movement. The Sports GMT has 3 basic color options and a few limited editions color schemes to choose from. Since I already have a few black dial watches, I went with the blue dial to add a bit more colors to my collection. The prices for these watches vary between different regions, but the retail price here in New Zealand is $995 including tax, which is around $600 US. Pretty expensive I reckon, hence why I had to shop around for a discount. It's always with Seiko watches, buy them at a discounted price to get your money's worth. Now for the packaging, I got mine from Japan, so it may be a bit different from your local Seiko's packaging. First, we have a small outer box that houses an inner box and documents. For the documents, we have a manual and an international warranty that is valid for 1 year. Inside the inner box, we finally have the watch. On an interesting note, not all sellers in Japan will offer an international warranty, but places that deal with tourists will likely do. Something to keep in mind if you plan to pick up a Seiko in Japan. Now with all of that out the way, let's get into the watch. The watch has a diameter of 42.5mm, it is 13.6mm thick. Most of Seiko GMTs tend to be quite thick like this one. The lug width is 22mm. Despite the big diameter, the lug-to-lug distance is 46mm. The bracelet also has female end links, so this watch should be pretty wearable even for those with small wrists. For the watch glass, we have a hardlex crystal with no AR coating. There's also a cyclops at the 3 o'clock position. The magnification looks to be only 1.5 times. For water resistant, it's rated at 100 meters. There's no screw down crown though, so I would be extra careful if you're going swimming with this watch. With a few links removed to fit my 6.2-inch wrist, the watch weighs in at 141 grams. As for the movement, this watch is running with the Seiko 4R34 movement. The 4R34 is an entry-level automatic movement that beats at 3 Hz or 21,600 beats per hour. The movement features a collar GMT complication. The movement also has a date complication and supports hacking and hand winding. It has a power reserve of around 40 hours and has an accuracy range of -20 to +40 seconds per day. This particular watch has an accuracy of +2 seconds per day. Heck, that's even better than the more expensive Seiko SPB143 I reviewed recently. Next up, let's have a closer look at the watch. To start, we have a case that most would refer to as an SKX case. I believe this particular case shape actually originated from the Seiko 7002 diver from the later 80s and early 90s. I suppose it took a while to gain traction and finally achieve iconic status in the Seiko's design book thanks to the SKX line. The top of the case is brush finish and the sides are polished. The case is also a lot more rounded compared to many other popular watch cases. There is a chamfer edge of sorts running between the top and the sides. The lugs also have a similar finish applied to them and have been rounded off nicely as well. Seiko also kept the drill lugs, making it a lot easier to swap out straps. The back of the case is polished similar to the sides. We also have a displaced caseback with a mineral crystal. The caseback has also been printed with the Seiko logo, water rating, reference number, and some other tags. If you have the SSK003J version, you also have this Made in Japan text printed, just like this one. Moving on to the crown, we have an unsigned crown with a polished finish. The crown is not screwed down, meaning that you can wind the watch from the default position. It is also very smooth and easy to operate. However, you may need a bit of nail to pull out the crowns, since it's a non-screw down crown after all. For the bezel, we have a friction bezel that can be rotated in both directions. What this means is that there are no click sound when you rotate. This type of bezel isn't common nowadays since it's not as good as a click spring bezel, and is probably used here as a cost-cutting measure. There are also a couple of disadvantages of having a friction bezel. One is that it may become looser or tighter over time due to usage or dirt. The other is that it is easier to get knocked around. On the other hand, a big positive with this type of bezel is that you won't ever get the ever annoyingly misaligned bezel issue. As for the bezel itself, it's well finished, smooth to the touch but easy to grip, and also operates well. Not too loose or too tight, just right in my opinion. The bezel insert is quite interesting. It's a glass bezel insert instead of the usual aluminium you will see from Seiko. The glass is hardlex, similar to the main watch glass. The bezel has 2 colors, black and blue. When viewed at different angles, the blue part will sort of becomes darker, which is pretty cool. As this is a GMT watch, the markers are presented in a 24 hours format instead of the usual diving timer. Moving on to the bracelet, we have a pseudo 5 links Jubilee style bracelet. What I mean by pseudo is that it looks like a 5 links, but the two connecting links don't articulate separately like a proper 5 links bracelet. The links are connected together via split pins. These are not major downside, but should be noticed as they are cost-cutting measures. The end links are hollow, but thankfully female or short end links, which help makes this watch very wearable even on small wrists like mine. There is a small gap between the end link and the lugs, but it's not as bad as the SBB143 that I reviewed recently. The top of the bracelet is polished in the center and brush finish on the outer. The sides are polished and the bottom is brush finish. The bracelet articulates fairly well. Surprisingly, it also tapers from 22mm down to 18mm. Next is the clasp. We have a button push clasp along with a safety latch. The clasp is pressed instead of mill, another cost-cutting measure. It is brushed on the top and polished on the sides. The safety latch is decorated with the Seiko logo. There are 4 micro adjustment holes. Combining with the shorter links on the bracelet, you should have no problem getting the perfect fit for your wrist. Overall, the bracelet and clasp aren't the best, but they are adequate for this watch. Moving on to the dial. On one hand, Seiko is notorious for their somewhat subpar bracelet. On the other hand, they are appreciated for their watch dials, and this watch dial is no exception. We have a dark blue matte dial with a very subtle sunburst effect. The effect is really only noticeable under bright lights or sunlight. The indices are applied and filled with a good amount of Seiko Lume Bright. Below the 12 o'clock, we have an applied Seiko logo and the Seiko Sports logo printed in white. Above the 6 o'clock, we have the automatic text printed in white and the GMT text printed in red. Finally, there's an unframed date window at the 3 o'clock position. For the hands, we have the iconic SKX handsets, along with a new GMT hand. Hour and minute hands are polished and filled with lume. The second hand has a flatter finish and is painted black on one half. There's also a lollipop counterweight that's been filled with lume. The GMT hand is an arrow style hand and is painted red to match with the GMT text. It is, of course, also filled with the same lume. At the edge of the dial, we have an integrated chapter ring that also acts as a rehaul. This chapter ring is presented in a 24 hours format. This means that you can track up to 3 different time zones using this watch. Pretty cool, I reckon. It also looks to be fairly well aligned. One other interesting fact is this Made in Japan text printed at the bottom of the dial. A lot of Seiko watches often have a J and a K model, with J being made in Japan and K outside of Japan. The two models are practically exactly the same watches. It's really just the prints on the dial and the back of the case. The J version is sold in Japan and some other markets including the US. Here in New Zealand, we get the K version. Moving on to the lume, Seiko watches are famous for their lume. While there's no lume on the bezel insert, the lume on the dial and hands are bright and last for a good amount of time. Now, in terms of wrist fit, despite the big 42.5mm diameter, the watch fits nicely on my 6.2-inch wrist thanks to the short lug-to-lug and the female end links. However, the clasp buckle is a bit too long and almost spans the entire width of the back of my wrist. I measure it to be about 50mm in length. A reduction of 3 to 5mm would definitely help the watch fit better on small wrists. This is more of an annoyance rather than a big issue though. On a positive note, the watch is very comfortable to wear thanks to the SKX case. It also goes well with all sorts of straps. The lugs are drills, so it's also very easy to switch straps. Overall, it's still a very comfortable and good fitting watch, even on the default bracelet. So, what are my thoughts on this watch? Let's start with the good points first. The watch features the iconic SKX case. Despite the big diameters of 42.5mm, it is very wearable for all wrist sizes. I reckon it also goes well with any sorts of straps, and the drill lugs makes changing straps a breeze. The dial is simple yet very legible and nice to look at. As usual with Seiko watches, the lumes are bright and last for a long time. The bezel insert is also quite unique and superbly done. I've seen a lot of people complain about the movement, but I reckon it's a strong point for this watch. It's an affordable yet robust workhorse movement that will last the test of time. The movement is also cheap to produce, so servicing shouldn't cost too much either. A lot of people tend to forget that this is the first watch featuring the 4R34 movement, which opens the door for many other micro brands with their own GMT watches. When it comes to buying the watch, there are quite a few options to choose from. Aside from the basic 3 color schemes, you also have a few limited editions. It's also fairly affordable for a GMT watch, which connects us to the first negative point, the retail price. At the full retail price, I do not think that this watch is a good value proposition. I would recommend getting it at 20 to 25% off. The recently released SSK003 is priced much better in my opinion, at least here in New Zealand. The next point I don't like is the bracelet. I don't mind that it's not a real 5 links. I also don't mind that the clasp is pressed instead of mill, but I do mind the bloody long buckle. It's too big for my wrist. It's like they consider small wrists with the short lugs to lug and female end links, but totally forgot about the clasp. The Cyclops is also a bit useless in my opinion. The magnification is only 1.5 times. They should increase it to 2 times, or just remove it altogether. Also, a sapphire watch clasp would be nice. They're not that expensive to produce these days. Overall though, it's still a great watch despite the cons. In my opinion, this sports GMT makes a great first watch, or an addition to your existing Seiko collection. And that brings us to the end of this video. What do you think about this watch? Are you interested in getting your hands on one? If you already got one, what are your thoughts about the watch? Feel free to drop a comment down below and let us know. I hope this video helped you in some ways. If you find it enjoyable or helpful, please drop a like and subscribe for future videos. As a growing channel, I really appreciate your support. Until next time.